I married him on a Tuesday morning in November, with rain streaking the chapel windows and no flowers on the altar. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. My name is Clara Merrick, though I suppose I must now accustom myself to Clara Ashford, and the man standing beside me in that cold stone chapel was Viscount Edmund Ashford, a stranger in every sense but legal obligation. He did not look at me during the vows. His voice was steady and empty when he promised to honor me, the words delivered with the same inflection one might use to approve household accounts. I wore a dress of pale gray silk, borrowed from his late mother's wardrobe, and altered hastily by a seamstress who did not meet my eyes. There were 6 witnesses, all servants from his estate. Not a single member of his family attended. Not a single friend of mine existed to invite. When the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, Edmund turned to me with a face carved from marble and offered his arm. I took it. His coat smelled of tobacco and rain. We walked down the aisle together in silence, and I felt the weight of every eye upon us, measuring, judging, calculating the transaction that had just taken place. A widow of modest means, not quite ruined but close enough. A viscount in need of discretion and an heir, still grieving a wife dead 3 years. It was a marriage of convenience in the truest and cruelest sense, and I had agreed to it because the alternative was destitution. But I did not come alone. Thomas sat rigid in the 3rd pew, his small hands clenched white against his knees, his face a mask of fury barely contained. He was 9 years old, my late husband's son, and he had not spoken a word to me since I told him we were leaving our cottage to live in Lord Ashford's manor. He did not understand why I had agreed to this. He did not understand that women like me do not have the luxury of refusing offers from men like Edmund Ashford. All Thomas understood was that I had betrayed him, that I had chosen a stranger over the memory of his father, and that he would never, ever forgive me. When we stepped outside into the rain, Edmund gestured toward the carriage waiting at the gate. It was black and polished, pulled by 2 gray horses whose breath steamed in the cold air. A footman opened the door. Edmund handed me inside without ceremony, then turned back toward the chapel. For a moment, I thought he had forgotten something. Then I saw him approach Thomas, still standing alone beneath the eaves, soaked to the skin and trembling with something far deeper than cold. Edmund crouched down, bringing himself level with the boy's eyes. He said something I could not hear. Thomas jerked his head away, his jaw locked tight. Edmund did not touch him. He simply stood, nodded once as though accepting a declaration of war, and walked back toward the carriage. Thomas followed at a distance, his steps slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on the ground. When he climbed inside and took the seat farthest from both of us, he finally looked at me, and what I saw in his face broke my heart into pieces I did not know how to gather. He hated me. He hated Edmund. He hated this carriage and this rain and this life I had chosen for us. The ride to Ashford Manor took 2 hours through narrow lanes lined with skeletal trees and fields gone brown with autumn's death. Edmund sat across from me, his gaze fixed on the window, his posture perfect and unyielding. Thomas sat beside me, but might as well have been 1,000 miles away. No one spoke. The only sounds were the clatter of wheels on stone, the soft creak of leather, and the rain drumming against the roof like fingers tapping out a code I could not decipher. I had seen the manor once before, 3 weeks earlier when Edmund had summoned me to discuss the terms of our arrangement. It had been dusk then, and the house had loomed against the sky like something out of a Gothic novel, all gray stone and tall windows and chimneys exhaling smoke into the gathering dark. I had felt small standing before it, insignificant, a sparrow about to be swallowed by a great stone mouth. Now, arriving as its mistress, I felt no larger. If anything, the manor seemed to have grown in the intervening weeks, spreading its shadow wider, claiming more of the sky. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. A line of servants stood waiting beneath the portico, their uniforms immaculate, their faces carefully blank. Edmund descended first, then turned to offer me his hand. His glove was damp with rain. I took it and stepped down onto gravel that crunched beneath my shoes. Thomas followed without assistance, landing hard and stalking past the waiting staff without a glance. The housekeeper, a tall woman with silver hair, pinned severely back, stepped forward and curtsied. Her name was Mrs. Halloway, and she had been with the Ashford family for 30 years. Edmund had told me this during our first meeting, his tone suggesting it was a point of pride, or perhaps a warning. She looked at me now with eyes that revealed nothing, neither welcome nor hostility, only a cool assessment that made me feel as though I were a piece of furniture being evaluated for placement. "Welcome to Ashford Manor, my lady," she said. Her voice was smooth and formal. "Your rooms have been prepared, if you would follow me." Edmund spoke before I could respond. "See that the boy is settled first." He gestured toward Thomas, who stood apart from us all, arms crossed, staring at the ground. "He will have the blue room in the east wing." Mrs. Halloway hesitated for just a fraction of a second, her gaze flicking from Edmund to Thomas and back again. "Of course, my lord." She turned to one of the younger maids. "Mary, show the young master to his room and see that he has everything he needs." Thomas looked up sharply. "I am not the young master," he said. His voice was raw and fierce. "I am not anything to him." The courtyard went very still. Even the rain seemed to pause in its falling. Edmund did not react, did not move, did not alter his expression in any way. He simply looked at Thomas with those cold gray eyes, and after a long moment, he nodded. "As you say," he replied quietly. Then he turned and walked into the house, leaving us all standing in the rain. Mrs. Halloway recovered first. "Come along then," she said briskly, addressing Thomas with a gentleness that surprised me. "Let us get you dry and warm." She reached out as though to guide him, but Thomas pulled away and followed the maid named Mary toward a side entrance, his small figure disappearing into the shadows of the manor. I stood alone in the courtyard, water dripping from the hem of my dress, my heart pounding in my chest. This was my home now, this gray fortress filled with cold rooms and colder silences. This was the life I had chosen, the bargain I had struck, safety in exchange for warmth, security in exchange for love, a title in exchange for everything that mattered. Mrs. Halloway waited patiently. When I finally met her eyes, she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, and I wondered if she understood more than she let on. If perhaps she had stood in courtyards like this before, watching other women arrive to fill roles they did not want, in houses that did not want them. "This way, my lady," she said, and I followed her into the dark mouth of Ashford Manor, leaving the rain and the gray November sky behind. The interior was exactly as I remembered, only more so. High ceilings supported by carved beams, portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls, floors of polished marble that reflected candlelight in wavering pools. Everything was immaculate, orderly, suffocating in its perfection. We climbed a grand staircase to the second floor, then turned down a long corridor hung with tapestries depicting scenes I did not recognize. Hunting parties, battles, women in gardens looking always away from the viewer, their faces hidden or turned. "Your rooms," Mrs. Halloway said, opening a pair of heavy oak doors. The suite was larger than the entire cottage Thomas and I had shared. A sitting room with tall windows overlooking the grounds. A bedroom beyond, visible through another open door, with a canopied bed draped in deep blue velvet. A writing desk, a vanity, bookshelves empty and waiting. A fire already burning in the grate, casting warm light over furniture that looked as though it had never been sat upon. "Lord Ashford's rooms are connected through that door, Mrs. Halloway continued, gesturing to a door on the far wall. "He has asked that it remain locked unless he sends word otherwise." I nodded, unable to form words. The relief I felt was immediate and shameful. Edmund did not intend to claim his marital rights, at least not yet. Perhaps not ever. This marriage was business, nothing more. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt only a deep and formless grief for something I could not name. "Dinner is served at 8, Mrs. Halloway went on. "His lordship takes his meals in the dining room. You are welcome to join him or have a tray sent up, as you prefer." She paused, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "The boy has asked for his meal in his room tonight. I have allowed it. I thought it best." "Thank you," I said quietly. "That was kind." She studied me for a moment, and I had the strange sense that she was revising some earlier judgment. "We do what we can, my lady," she said. Then she curtsied and withdrew, leaving me alone in rooms too large and too silent. I crossed to the window and looked out over the grounds. The rain had lessened to a fine mist. Beyond the manicured lawns, I could see the outline of a wood, dark and dense, and beyond that, nothing but gray sky meeting gray earth. It was beautiful in a desolate way, this place, beautiful and lonely, and utterly indifferent to my presence. I thought of Thomas in his room somewhere in the east wing, probably refusing to speak to Mary, probably sitting on the edge of his bed with that look of betrayed fury still burning in his eyes. I thought of Edmund, wherever he was in this vast house, maintaining his perfect composure, his perfect distance. And I thought of myself, standing at this window in borrowed silk, playing the role of viscountess to an audience of ghosts and servants, and a husband who could not bear to look at me during our wedding vows. This was my life now, this silence, this space, this careful arrangement of people who would never touch. I did not cry. I had learned long ago that tears change nothing. Instead, I unpacked the single trunk that contained everything I owned, hung my 3 dresses in a wardrobe built to hold 30, and tried to imagine a future in which this house might ever feel like home. At 8 o'clock, I went downstairs to dinner. The dining room was enormous, the table long enough to seat 20. Edmund sat at the head, a single place setting before him. When I entered, he stood, nodded, and gestured to the chair at his right. A servant appeared from nowhere to pull it out for me. I sat. Edmund sat. Plates were brought. Wine was poured. We ate in silence. I tried once to speak. "The house is very beautiful," I said. Edmund glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he replied. "It has been in my family for 7 generations." That was the extent of our conversation. When the meal ended, Edmund rose, bowed slightly, and excused himself. I watched him leave, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Then I climbed the stairs back to my empty rooms, locked the door, and sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. Somewhere in the house, Thomas was awake. I could feel it. His anger was a living thing, a presence that filled the spaces between walls, that seeped through floorboards and hung in the air like smoke. He would not forgive me for this. Perhaps he was right not to. I had married a stranger to save us both. I had brought my son to a house where he was neither wanted nor understood. I had traded one kind of loneliness for another, and I did not yet know which was worse. Outside, the rain began again, soft and persistent, tapping against the windows like a question I could not answer. The first week passed like a slow fever, each day blurring into the next until I could no longer distinguish Tuesday from Thursday, morning from afternoon. I moved through the manor like a ghost, learning its rhythms, memorizing its silences. I learned that Edmund took breakfast alone at 7, that he spent his mornings in the study attending to estate business, that he rode out most afternoons to inspect his lands or visit tenants. I learned that Mrs. Halloway ran the household with military precision, that the maids spoke in whispers, that the cook prepared meals no one seemed to enjoy. I learned where every portrait hung, which stairs creaked, which corridors held the coldest draughts. What I did not learn was how to reach my son. Thomas refused to leave his room for the first 3 days. He would not speak to me when I knocked on his door. He would not eat the meals sent up on trays. On the 4th day, I found him in the library, standing before a wall of books with his arms crossed and his face set in that expression of determined misery I had come to know too well. He did not acknowledge me when I entered. I stood in the doorway watching him, this small, fierce boy who looked so much like his father, and I felt the distance between us like a physical thing, a chasm that grew wider with every passing hour. "Thomas," I said softly, "please talk to me." He pulled a book from the shelf at random, opened it, stared at a page without reading. There is nothing to say. I crossed the room slowly, careful not to startle him, not to push. "I know you are angry with me. I know you think I have betrayed you. But I need you to understand that I did this for us, to keep us safe, to give you a future." He slammed the book shut, the sound explosive in the quiet library. "I had a future," he said, his voice shaking. "I had a father. I had a home. You took it away. Your father died, Thomas. I could not bring him back. I could not keep us in that cottage forever. We had no money, no protection. If I had not accepted Lord Ashford's proposal, we would have lost everything. So instead, you sold us to him." He turned to face me then, and his eyes were bright with tears he refused to shed. "You sold yourself, and you sold me. And now we are prisoners in this horrible house with that horrible man who does not want us here. He does want us here. He offered us a home. He offered you a title." Thomas's voice was cold now, adult in its bitterness. "He does not care about me. He does not even look at me. I am just something he had to accept to get what he wanted." I reached for him, but he stepped back, putting the width of a reading table between us. "That is not true," I said, though I was no longer certain. Edmund had indeed been careful to maintain his distance from Thomas, had spoken to him only when necessary, had made no effort to engage or reassure. I had told myself it was respect, an acknowledgement of the boy's grief and anger, a decision to give him space. But perhaps Thomas was right. Perhaps Edmund simply did not care. "I want to go home," Thomas whispered. "Please, Mama, I want to go home." The word Mama broke something inside me. He had not called me that since the day I told him we were leaving. I moved around the table, and this time when I reached for him, he did not pull away. I wrapped my arms around his thin shoulders and held him while he trembled against me, his face pressed into my dress, his hands clutching at my sleeves. "I know," I whispered into his hair. "I know you do. But this is our home now. We must try to make the best of it. We must try to find a way to be happy here." He pulled back, wiping his eyes roughly with his sleeve. "I will never be happy here," he said. "Not with him." "Then we will find our own happiness," I told him. "You and I. We will make our own life within these walls. Can you try, Thomas? For me?" He looked at me for a long moment, his face still angry but softening at the edges. Finally, he nodded. "But I will never call him father," he said. "I will never pretend he is anything to me. I will not ask you to," I promised, and I meant it. That night at dinner, Thomas appeared in the dining room for the first time. He took his seat across from me without a word, his expression carefully blank. Edmund glanced up when he entered, his eyes moving from the boy to me and back again. For a moment I thought he might say something, might acknowledge this small victory. Instead, he simply nodded and returned his attention to his plate. We ate in silence, as always. Thomas pushed food around without eating much. Edmund consumed his meal with mechanical efficiency. I sat between them, watching both, wondering how three people could share a table and still be so completely alone. When the meal ended, Edmund stood as he always did, preparing to leave. But this time he paused, his hand resting on the back of his chair. He looked at Thomas. "There is a chess set in the drawing room," he said. "If you play, you are welcome to use it." Thomas stared at him, his face unreadable. "I know how to play," he said flatly. "Then perhaps we might have a game sometime." The silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. I held my breath, waiting for Thomas to refuse, to say something cruel, to reject this small offered branch. But he only shrugged. "Perhaps," he said. Edmund nodded once and left the room. Thomas waited until his footsteps faded, then looked at me. "I will not play chess with him," he said. "I know," I replied. But it was a lie, because even then I could see something shift in my son's face, some tiny crack in the armor of his anger. Edmund had noticed him. Edmund had spoken to him. Edmund had offered something, however small. And Thomas, despite his words, had not entirely closed the door. The days continued their slow march forward. I fell into the routines of the house, learning my role as viscountess, though it felt like wearing someone else's skin. I met with Mrs. Halloway each morning to approve menus and discuss household matters. I responded to correspondence from Edmund's distant relatives, polite letters welcoming me to the family with words that did not quite mask their curiosity and judgment. I walked the grounds when the weather permitted, exploring gardens gone dormant for winter, paths that wound through bare trees toward the wood beyond. Thomas began to emerge more often from his room. I would find him in unexpected places, the conservatory examining dead plants, the ballroom's balcony staring down at the empty floor below, the stables watching the grooms tend the horses. He was mapping the territory of his captivity, I thought, learning where he might hide when the weight of this new life grew too heavy. Edmund remained a distant figure. A presence felt more than seen. I would catch glimpses of him through doorways, hear his voice giving instructions to the steward, see him riding back from the village in the gathering dusk. He was always polite when we encountered each other, always proper and always utterly unreachable. We had dinner together each evening, that strange silent ritual that felt less like intimacy and more like a performance we had both agreed to stage. But I noticed things, small things. The way his hands would still sometimes on his knife and fork, as though he had forgotten what he meant to do with them. The way his gaze would drift to the window during meals, his expression distant and troubled. The way he would sometimes pause in doorways, his hand on the frame, as though gathering strength to enter or leave. Edmund Ashford was not the cold, unfeeling aristocrat he appeared to be. He was simply a man who had forgotten how to be anything else. 3 weeks after our wedding, the first snow fell. I woke to find the grounds transformed, everything softened and made new under a blanket of white. From my window, I could see footprints leading from the house toward the stables, already being filled in by fresh flakes. Someone had been out early. I dressed quickly and went downstairs, following an impulse I did not quite understand. I found Edmund in the stable yard, standing beside one of the horses, his breath steaming in the cold air. He was not dressed for riding. He was simply standing there, one hand on the horse's neck, staring at nothing. He did not hear me approach until I was quite close. "My lord," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and for just a moment before his expression closed, I saw something raw and unguarded in his face. Loneliness, grief, a weariness so profound it seemed to age him 10 years. "Lady Ashford," he said, and his voice was carefully neutral again. "You are out early. I could not sleep. The snow is beautiful." "Yes." He looked back at the horse, his hand still resting against its warm neck. My wife loved the first snow. She would wake me before dawn to see it. She said it made the world feel clean again. Possible. It was the first time he had mentioned his first wife to me, the first time he had offered anything personal, anything true. I moved closer, careful to give him space, to let him control how near I came. "You must miss her very much," I said, "every day." The words were simple and devastating. He was silent for a long moment, then seemed to realize what he had said. To whom? He straightened, withdrawing behind his usual formality. "Forgive me. That was inappropriate." "No," I said quickly. "It was not. You loved her. That does not stop because time passes. That does not stop because you have remarried." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw surprise in his eyes, as though I had said something unexpected, as though perhaps no one had given him permission to still grieve. "She died giving birth to our son," he said quietly. "The child lived only 3 days. I watched them both die, and I could do nothing to save either of them. And when it was over, I promised myself I would never feel that helpless again, that I would never allow anyone close enough to destroy me the way their loss destroyed me. Is that why you married me? Because you knew I would not ask for your heart?" "Yes." His honesty was brutal and kind all at once. I needed a wife for appearance sake. I needed someone who would not expect love. "You needed protection and security. It seemed a fair arrangement." "It is," I said, "and yet it is also desperately sad." He smiled then, a brief flicker of something almost warm. "We are both too honest for our own good, it seems. Or perhaps we are simply too tired to pretend anymore. Perhaps." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know the boy hates me. He hates everything right now. He is grieving too. His father, his old life. He does not know how to be here. I do not know how to help him." Edmund's voice was low, almost tentative. "I do not know how to speak to children. I do not know what he needs." "Time," I said, "patience. And perhaps someone to show him that it is possible to survive loss and still find reasons to wake each morning." Edmund looked at me with an expression I could not read. "You are very wise, Lady Ashford. I am very tired, Lord Ashford. There is a difference." He almost smiled again. "Then, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you regret marrying me?" I considered lying, considered offering him reassurance or platitudes. But we had agreed to honesty, he and I, and so I gave him the truth. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. I regret that my son is unhappy, but I do not regret the choice itself. You have given us safety when we had none. You have been honorable in all your dealings with me. I could have done far worse. That is not exactly a ringing endorsement." "No," I said, "but it is honest." He nodded slowly. "I will accept it." We stood together in the snow, watching the flakes fall, listening to the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. It was the longest conversation we had ever had, the most real moment we had shared. And when Edmund finally excused himself and walked back toward the house, I felt something shift inside me. Not attraction, not affection, but something quieter and more durable, the beginning of understanding, the possibility of companionship. I returned to the house to find Thomas in the breakfast room, eating bread and jam with single-minded focus. He looked up when I entered, saw the snow in my hair, the dampness of my cloak. "Where were you?" he asked, walking, thinking. "About what? About how we make a life here, about how we move forward." He was silent for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. Then, "Do you think he loved her very much? His first wife?" I sat down across from him. "Yes, I think he loved her more than he knew how to bear losing." Thomas nodded slowly. "Father loved you like that. After he died, I used to hear you crying at night. I thought you would never stop." "But I did stop," I said gently. "Not because I stopped loving him, but because grief cannot last forever. Eventually, we must choose to live again." "Is that what you are doing? Choosing to live?" "I am trying to. And I need you to try too, Thomas. Not for Lord Ashford, for yourself." He looked down at his plate, at the crumbs scattered across its surface. "I do not know how," he whispered. "Neither do I admitted, "but perhaps we can learn together." He did not respond, but he did not argue either, and I took that as permission to hope. That afternoon, I was crossing the entrance hall when I heard voices from the drawing room. Edmund's low, steady tone, and Thomas's higher, defiant one. I stopped, holding my breath, listening. "I told you, I do not want to play," Thomas was saying. "I am not asking you to play. I am merely teaching you the strategy." There is a difference. Why do you care if I know strategy? Because intelligence is a weapon, and every man should know how to wield it. Edmund's voice was patient, almost gentle. Whether you choose to use that knowledge against me or for yourself is your decision. There was a long silence. Then Thomas said, "Show me again. The knights move." I stepped back from the doorway, my heart beating fast. Edmund was reaching out. Despite Thomas's anger, despite the boy's rejection, Edmund was trying, and Thomas, despite his protests, was allowing it. I went upstairs to my rooms and sat by the window watching the snow fall, and for the first time since arriving at Ashford Manor, I felt something that might have been hope. The house was beginning to shift around us, slowly, imperceptibly, but real nonetheless. We were not a family, not yet. Perhaps we never would be. But we were learning how to share the same walls. And that, I thought, was enough of a beginning. Winter settled over Ashford Manor like a held breath. The world outside frozen and silent, the world inside slowly thawing in ways I had not expected. The chess lessons continued, 3 times a week after dinner. Edmund and Thomas bent over the board in the drawing room, while I sat nearby with needlework I barely touched, listening to their careful exchanges. Edmund never raised his voice. Thomas never entirely dropped his guard. But something was building between them, fragile and tentative as new ice on a pond. I learned to read the signs of progress. The way Thomas would lean forward when Edmund explained a particularly clever move, his anger momentarily forgotten in the puzzle of strategy. The way Edmund's voice would soften when he corrected a mistake, never mocking, always patient. The way they would sometimes sit in silence for long minutes, both studying the board, and the silence felt less like distance and more like shared concentration. But trust is not built in straight lines, and there were days when Thomas would refuse to come to dinner, when he would lock himself in his room and not respond to my knocking. There were evenings when Edmund would withdraw completely, his face closed and remote, and I knew he was walking the halls of his own grief, visiting rooms I could not enter. We were 3 people learning to orbit each other without collision, and it was exhausting work. It was during one of these difficult days, nearly 2 months after our wedding, that everything shifted. I had gone looking for Thomas in the afternoon and found his room empty. A quick search of his usual haunts, the library, the conservatory, the stables, revealed nothing. I began to worry. The day was bitterly cold, the sky low and threatening snow, and Thomas had been particularly withdrawn that morning, barely speaking at breakfast. I sought out Mrs. Halloway. "Have you seen Thomas?" I asked, trying to keep the concern from my voice. "Not since luncheon, my lady." She saw my expression, and her own grew troubled. "Shall I ask the staff?" "Please. And if anyone knows where he might have gone, send word to me immediately." I returned to the entrance hall, uncertain what to do next. That was when Edmund emerged from his study, a ledger in his hand, his expression preoccupied. He looked up and saw me standing there, and something in my face made him stop. "What is wrong?" he asked. "I cannot find Thomas. No one has seen him for several hours." Edmund set the ledger down on a side table. "Where have you looked?" "Everywhere. His room, the library, the stables. I think he may have gone outside." Edmund's expression changed, a flash of something I had never seen before. Fear. In this cold, without telling anyone? He has been upset today, distant. I think perhaps he needed to be alone. Alone is one thing. Edmund was already moving toward the door, taking his coat from the stand. Lost in a snowstorm is another. "How long ago did you last see him?" 3 hours. Perhaps 4. Edmund's jaw tightened. He turned to a footman who had appeared at the sound of our raised voices. "Gather the outdoor staff. We need to search the grounds. Tell them to check the wood first, then the outbuildings. And send someone to the village in case he went that direction." The footman hurried away. Edmund shrugged into his coat and looked at me. "You should stay here. If he returns, he will look for you." "I am coming with you," I said. "Clara." It was the first time he had used my given name. The sound of it in his voice, urgent and almost gentle, made me stop, but I shook my head. "He is my son. I am coming." Edmund studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me. The temperature is dropping and the light will be gone soon." We went out into the cold together, the wind biting through my cloak immediately. The sky was the color of iron, heavy with the promise of snow. Edmund called out Thomas's name, his voice carrying across the frozen grounds. I added my own calls, my throat already raw from the cold. Nothing answered but the wind. We searched the gardens first, the formal paths and the winter-bare hedgerows. Then the orchard, skeletal trees casting long shadows across untouched snow. Then the stables again, more thoroughly this time, checking every stall and storage room. Still nothing. Other men joined us, groundskeepers and grooms, spreading out across the estate with lanterns as the afternoon dimmed toward evening. Edmund led me toward the wood, his pace quick but careful, making sure I did not fall on the icy ground. The trees closed around us, dense and dark, the temperature dropping further in their shadows. I could no longer feel my hands or feet. My lungs burned with each breath, but I kept moving, kept calling, kept searching. And then Edmund stopped. So suddenly, I nearly ran into him. He was staring at something ahead, his body gone rigid. I followed his gaze and saw it. A small dark shape at the base of a large oak, partly covered in snow, utterly still. Thomas. Edmund was running before I could move, his long strides carrying him across the distance in seconds. He dropped to his knees beside the boy, his hands moving quickly, checking for breath, for warmth, for life. I stumbled after him, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. "Is he—" I could not finish the question. "He is breathing." Edmund's voice was tight with controlled fear. "But he is very cold. We need to get him back to the house immediately." He gathered Thomas into his arms, lifting him as though he weighed nothing. The boy's head lolled against Edmund's shoulder, his face pale as death, his lips tinged blue. Edmund looked at me. "Run ahead. Tell them to prepare hot water and blankets. Have someone fetch the doctor from the village. Go now." I ran. I do not remember the journey back to the house. I only remember the burning in my chest, the taste of blood in my mouth, the desperate prayer running through my mind like a chant. "Please let him live. Please let him live. Please." Mrs. Halloway took one look at my face and began issuing orders before I could speak. By the time Edmund arrived with Thomas in his arms, a room near the kitchen had been prepared, the warmest in the house, a fire roaring in the grate, basins of hot water ready, blankets piled high. Edmund laid Thomas on the bed and stepped back, his hands shaking. It was the first time I had seen him visibly shaken. Mrs. Halloway and two maids worked efficiently, stripping away Thomas's wet clothes, wrapping him in heated blankets, chafing his hands and feet to restore circulation. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to think. Thomas looked so small in that bed, so fragile, and I could not stop seeing him as he had been in Edmund's arms, limp and lifeless as a broken doll. Edmund touched my shoulder gently. "He will be all right." He spoke as though trying to convince himself as much as me. "We found him in time." "What was he doing out there?" I whispered. "Why did he go so far? I do not know, but we will ask him when he wakes." "And he will wake, Clara." There it was again, my name in his voice, an intimacy born of crisis, of shared fear. I looked up at him and saw that his face was drawn, his eyes haunted. He cared. Despite his careful distance, despite his determination not to let anyone close, Edmund cared what happened to this angry, defiant boy who had come into his house hating him. The doctor arrived an hour later, examined Thomas thoroughly, and pronounced that he would recover fully with rest and warmth. He had been outside for hours, the doctor said, and was fortunate not to have developed frostbite or worse. Another hour, and the outcome might have been very different. After the doctor left, I sat beside Thomas's bed and watched him sleep. His breathing was steady now, his color improving. One small hand lay outside the blankets. The fingers curled loosely. I took that hand in mine and held it, willing my warmth into him, willing him to be well. Edmund appeared in the doorway. "May I?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He came in and stood on the other side of the bed, looking down at Thomas with an expression I could not quite read. "I am sorry," I said. "If I had been watching him more closely, if I had seen how upset he was. This is not your fault." Edmund's voice was firm. "He is a child. Children do foolish things. We found him. That is what matters." We stood in silence for a time, the only sound the crackling of the fire and Thomas's soft breathing. Then Edmund spoke again, his voice low. When I saw him lying there in the snow, I thought. He stopped, gathering himself. I thought I had lost another child. And I realized that despite everything, despite his anger and his refusal to accept me, I have come to care what happens to him. I do not know when it happened. Perhaps during those chess games. Perhaps simply from watching him struggle with a grief I understand too well. But it happened nonetheless. I looked up at him. This man I had married out of necessity. This stranger who was slowly becoming something more. "He is easy to care for," I said softly. "When you see past the anger to the hurt beneath it." Edmund nodded. He sat down in the chair on his side of the bed, as though taking up a vigil. "I will stay with him tonight. You should rest. I am not leaving him. Then we will both stay." And so we did. We sat on opposite sides of Thomas's bed as the night deepened around us, watching him sleep, watching each other across the small distance that separated us. Mrs. Halloway brought tea and blankets. The fire was fed and tended. The house grew quiet around us. It was near midnight when Thomas finally stirred. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clearing as he took in his surroundings. He saw me first, and his expression crumpled. "Mama," he whispered, "I am sorry. Hush now." I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "You are safe. That is all that matters." His gaze moved past me and found Edmund sitting quietly in his chair. Something flickered across Thomas's face, confusion and something else. He looked back at me. "Did he find me?" he asked. "We both found you." "But yes, Lord Ashford carried you back to the house." Thomas turned his head to look at Edmund again. His voice when he spoke was small and uncertain. "Why?" Edmund leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Because," he said simply, "I could not bear the thought of you dying in that wood." Thomas stared at him. "But I have been horrible to you. I have said terrible things. I told you I hated you." "Yes." Edmund's voice was gentle. "You did. Then why do you care?" Edmund was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured, true. "Because I know what it is to lose everything. I know what it is to be angry at a world that has taken from you what you cannot get back. I know what it is to push people away because letting them close means risking more pain. And I know that beneath all that anger, you are simply a boy who misses his father and does not know how to make sense of a world that no longer includes him." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I do miss him. Every day, every moment. I know you do. And that will never go away entirely. But it will become bearable, and you will learn to carry it without letting it destroy you." "How?" Thomas's voice broke. "How do you bear it?" Edmund glanced at me, then back at Thomas. By allowing myself to care about new people. By accepting that love always carries the risk of loss, but that the alternative, shutting yourself away from everyone, is a worse kind of death. He paused. You taught me that, Thomas. You and your mother. I had forgotten how to let anyone matter. You reminded me. Thomas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I did not mean to get lost. I just needed to think, to be alone. And I walked too far, and then I could not find my way back, and it got so cold. We know. Edmund's voice was steady. And we are grateful you are safe. Thomas looked between us, his young face struggling with something too large for him to name. Finally he said, I do not hate you. I thought I did, but I do not think I ever really did. I know, Edmund said. Can we still play chess? Yes. As often as you like. Thomas nodded, exhausted, and let his eyes drift closed again. I tucked the blankets around him more securely. Edmund stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting so long in one position. Get some rest, he said to me. I will have someone sit with him if you wish to sleep in your own bed. I would rather stay. He nodded. Then I will have a proper bed brought in for you. Edmund. I stopped him as he reached the door. Thank you. For finding him. For caring about him. He looked back at me, and in the firelight his face seemed younger, less guarded. He is not hard to care about, he said, echoing my own words back to me. And neither are you. He left before I could respond, his footsteps fading down the corridor. I sat back down beside Thomas, my heart full of something I could not name. The boy slept peacefully now, his hands still in mine, his breathing deep and even. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and silent, covering the tracks we had made searching for him, smoothing away the evidence of crisis. Inside, in this warm room with firelight dancing on the walls, something had shifted irrevocably. We had become, without quite meaning to, a family. Not the family Thomas had lost, not the family Edmund had buried, but a new configuration of people who had found their way to each other through grief and necessity and the slow, patient work of learning to care. Thomas recovered quickly over the next few days. By the end of the week, he was up and about, though under strict orders not to wander far from the house. The chess games resumed, but now they were different. Thomas asked questions. Edmund answered them. They talked about things beyond strategy, about horses and history, about the estate and the village, about small, ordinary things that built connection word by word. I watched them together and saw the man Edmund must have been before loss hollowed him out. Patient, kind, capable of warmth when he allowed himself to feel it. And I saw Thomas soften day by day, his anger transforming into something gentler, his defenses lowering inch by careful inch. As for Edmund and myself, we too were changing. Our dinners were no longer silent. We spoke about the day, about the household, about Thomas's progress. We were still formal with each other, still careful, but the formality had become comfortable rather than cold. We had seen each other afraid. We had worked together in crisis. We had watched over a sleeping child and spoken truths we had not known we carried. One evening, perhaps a week after the incident in the wood, Edmund asked me to join him in his study after Thomas had gone to bed. I went, uncertain what he wanted, and found him standing by the fire with 2 glasses of port already poured. I wanted to speak with you, he said, handing me one of the glasses. About our arrangement. My heart sank. Had he decided this was too much? That taking on a wife and child had been a mistake? I kept my face carefully neutral. Of course. When we married, we agreed to certain terms. A marriage of convenience. Separate lives conducted under one roof. Distance maintained. He took a sip of his port. I would like to renegotiate those terms. I did not understand. What do you mean? He set his glass down and looked at me directly. I mean that I no longer wish to maintain such distance between us. I mean that I would like us to try to build something more than a business arrangement. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, honestly. Why? I asked, though I thought I knew. Because in these last weeks, I have remembered what it feels like to be alive, to care about someone beyond myself. Thomas has taught me that. And you. He paused. You have been patient with me. You have not demanded more than I could give. You have allowed me to grieve and to heal at my own pace. And in doing so, you have shown me that perhaps I am capable of more than I believed. I am not her, I said quietly. I will never be your first wife. I cannot replace what you lost. I do not want you to replace her. Edmund's voice was firm. I want you to be yourself. Clara. The woman who ran through snow to find her son. The woman who sat vigil all night without complaint. The woman who sees beneath my coldness to the grief I carry and does not judge me for it. I do not know how to be a wife to you in truth. We have been strangers for so long. Then we will learn, as we have learned everything else, slowly, together. I looked at him standing there in the firelight, this complicated wounded man who had opened his home to me, who had saved my son's life, who was asking now for permission to open his heart as well. And I realized that somewhere along the way, without quite noticing, I had begun to care for him too, not with the passionate intensity of first love, but with something quieter and perhaps more durable, respect, gratitude, affection, the possibility of something deeper if given time and space to grow. Yes, I said, we can try. He smiled then, a real smile, warm and relieved. Thank you. We stood together in comfortable silence, sipping our port, watching the fire. And when Edmund reached out and took my hand, his touch tentative and questioning, I did not pull away. I laced my fingers through his and held on, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. This was not the ending of our story. It was barely the beginning. There would be difficult days ahead, moments of doubt and fear, old wounds that would ache in cold weather. But we had survived the worst of winter. We had found each other in the dark wood. And that, I thought, was enough to build a life on. Upstairs, Thomas slept peacefully, no longer a prisoner in this house, but a boy who was slowly finding his way home. And somewhere in the halls where Edmund's first wife had once walked, I felt her presence not as a ghost, but as a blessing. She had loved this man. She had made this house a home, and now she was gone. But the capacity for love she had nurtured in him remained, dormant but not dead, waiting only for someone patient enough to wake it. I was that someone, not because I was special or brave, but because I had been desperate enough to accept a loveless marriage and stubborn enough to try to make it into something more. Love, I was learning, does not always arrive like a thunderstorm, dramatic and overwhelming. Sometimes it grows like moss, quietly, persistently, covering the cold stones of necessity with softness and warmth. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Spring came slowly to Ashford Manor, as though the world itself was learning to trust warmth again after so long in the cold. The snow retreated inch by inch, revealing gardens that had lain dormant through winter, paths that wound toward possibilities I had not allowed myself to imagine. The house changed with the season, no longer a fortress of stone and silence, but something softer, more forgiving. Or perhaps it was not the house that had changed at all. Perhaps it was only us. Edmund and I moved toward each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps, cautious of missteps, but willing to try. He began taking breakfast with Thomas and me, instead of alone in his study. The conversations were still somewhat formal at first, talk of weather and estate business, but gradually they deepened. Edmund told stories about his childhood, about growing up in this house with an older brother who had died young, about the weight of expectations that had shaped him into someone who believed showing emotion was weakness. Thomas listened with fascination, asking questions, and I saw my son begin to understand that Edmund's coldness had never been cruelty, only protection against pain too great to bear. In the evenings after Thomas went to bed, Edmund and I would sit together in the library or the drawing room, reading or talking or simply sharing silence that no longer felt empty. He asked about my life before our marriage, and I told him about the small cottage where Thomas and I had lived, about my first husband who had been kind but always distant, about the loneliness of widowhood and the terror of watching our savings dwindle with no prospects for replenishment. He listened without judgment, and when I finished, he said quietly that he was grateful I had accepted his proposal, that he could not imagine this house without me now. We were careful with each other still, careful not to move too quickly or expect too much. But there was an ease growing between us that felt like the beginning of something real. One afternoon in early March, Edmund found me in the conservatory, where I had been attempting to revive some of the neglected plants. He stood in the doorway watching me work, and when I looked up, he smiled. "You are covered in soil," he observed. I glanced down at my dress and laughed. It seemed impossible to repot anything without wearing half of it. "I fear I'm not a very elegant viscountess. I prefer you this way, real, unguarded." He came closer, his eyes moving over the plants I had been tending. My wife, my first wife, she loved this room. She would spend hours here, talking to the plants as though they could understand her. After she died, I could not bear to come in here. I let everything die. "I am sorry," I said softly. "Do not be. It is time to let things grow again." He reached out and touched one of the seedlings I had planted, his fingers gentle. Time to stop preserving grief as though it were something precious. "Is that what you have been doing?" "Yes." He looked at me then, his expression open in a way it had not been before. I thought if I kept everything exactly as it was, if I refused to change or feel or hope, then I would never have to risk losing anything again. But that is not living. That is only existing. And I am tired of merely existing, Clara. What do you want instead? He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to be a husband to you in truth, not just in name. I want to earn your affection, if you will allow me to try. And I want to be a father to Thomas, if he will permit it. Not to replace the man he lost, but to be someone he can rely upon, someone who will protect him and guide him and love him as he deserves." My throat tightened with emotion. "You already are those things, Edmund. You simply had not realized it yet." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Properly, as a husband should." I nodded, unable to speak. He stepped closer, cupping my face in his hands, and kissed me gently, almost reverently, as though I were something precious and fragile. It was nothing like the brief, cold kiss we had exchanged at our wedding. This was warm and real and full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Then why did you wait?" "Because I wanted you to trust me first, to know that I would not rush you or demand more than you were ready to give." "I do trust you," I said, "and I find that I want this, Edmund, a real marriage, a real life together. Then we will have it." He took my hand, raised it to his lips. "We will build it together, stone by stone, day by day, until we have made something beautiful." We stood together in that room full of new growth, surrounded by the evidence of careful tending, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not the wild, passionate love of novels, but something steadier and perhaps more valuable. Partnership, respect, affection, the quiet certainty that we would care for each other through whatever came next. Thomas noticed the change between us, of course. Children see more than we give them credit for. One morning at breakfast, he looked up from his eggs and said, "You are different now. Both of you." "Different how?" Edmund asked. "Happier. less sad. Thomas considered this. It is good. I was worried you would always be sad. Edmund reached across the table and ruffled Thomas's hair, a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable months before. We were sad because we had forgotten how not to be. But you reminded us. I did not do anything, Thomas protested. You did everything. Edmund's voice was serious. You allowed me to care about you even when you were determined to hate me. You gave me a reason to try again. Thomas ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. Can we go riding today, now that the weather is better? If your mother approves. They both looked at me, these two people who had become the center of my world, and I smiled. Of course, but Thomas, you must stay where Lord Ashford can see you. No wandering off. I will not, Thomas promised. I learned my lesson. We spent that afternoon on horseback, exploring the estate in the pale spring sunshine. Edmund was patient with Thomas, teaching him to handle his mount properly, praising his progress, correcting mistakes with gentle humor. Thomas glowed under the attention, his face bright with happiness I had not seen since before his father died. And Edmund, watching him, looked like a man who had found something he thought he had lost forever. We returned to the house windblown and hungry, and Mrs. Halloway met us with the news that guests had arrived unexpectedly. Edmund's face closed immediately, the openness draining away. Who? He asked shortly. Your cousin, Lord Hartwell, and his wife. They are waiting in the drawing room. Mrs. Halloway's expression suggested she shared Edmund's lack of enthusiasm. Edmund sighed. I had hoped to avoid this for at least another few months. He looked at me apologetically. My family has been curious about you. Too curious. I should have known they would not wait for a formal invitation. It is all right, I said, though my stomach had knotted with anxiety. I will need to meet them eventually. You do not understand. Edmund's voice was low. They will judge you. They will look for reasons to find you unsuitable. They have never approved of anything I have done, and they will certainly not approve of my marrying so soon, and to someone they consider beneath me. Then we will show them they are wrong to think so. I straightened my shoulders. I am your wife, Edmund. I am the Viscountess Ashford. They will treat me with the respect that position deserves, or they will leave this house. He looked at me with something like admiration. You are quite fierce when you choose to be. I have had to be. We went inside to change, and half an hour later I descended the stairs in my best dress, my hair arranged as elegantly as I could manage, my chin high and my hands steady. Edmund waited for me at the bottom, resplendent in formal attire, and he offered his arm. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I am with you. We entered the drawing room together. Lord Hartwell was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a mouth that suggested disapproval, even in repose. His wife was thin and severe, dressed in black despite it being years since anyone in the family had died. They both looked up as we entered, and I felt their gazes move over me, cataloging every detail, noting every imperfection. Cousin, Edmund said coolly. Lady Hartwell. This is unexpected. We felt it was time we met your new bride. Lord Hartwell's voice was jovial, but his eyes were calculating. You did not invite us to the wedding after all. One might think you were ashamed of the match. One might think I value my privacy, Edmund replied evenly, and that I saw no need to turn a simple ceremony into a spectacle. Simple indeed. Lady Hartwell's voice was thin and sharp. We heard you were married in the village chapel with only servants as witnesses. Most irregular, most practical, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm and clear. Lord Ashford and I saw no reason for elaborate ceremony. We are both widowed, both mature in years and judgment. We chose simplicity over ostentation. Lady Hartwell's eyes narrowed. How pragmatic. And tell me, Lady Ashford, what family do you come from? I confess I have not heard the name Merrick in connection with any family of note. That is because my family was not of note. My late husband was a gentleman farmer. I am not ashamed of my origins, Lady Hartwell, any more than I am ashamed of being honest about them. A farmer's widow. Lord Hartwell shook his head. Edmund, really? You could have done so much better. I could have done far worse. Edmund's voice had gone cold and dangerous. Clara is intelligent, capable, and kind. She manages this household with skill and grace. She has brought warmth back to a house that had grown cold with grief. And she has accepted my proposal, knowing full well that my heart was not fully mine to give. That takes courage most people lack. The room went very quiet. Lady Hartwell looked scandalized. Lord Hartwell looked calculating, as though trying to determine whether there was some advantage to be gained from this situation. "And the child," Lady Hartwell said. "We understand you have taken on a widow's son as well. Another man's child. How very charitable of you." "Thomas is no burden," Edmund said flatly. "He is a bright, courageous boy who has shown me more about resilience and forgiveness than most adults ever learn. I consider it a privilege to help raise him." "Does the boy know you are not his father?" Lord Hartwell asked. "It seems rather cruel to let him grow attached if you do not intend to treat him as your own." Before Edmund could respond, Thomas himself appeared in the doorway. He had been listening, I realized, listening and growing angrier with every word. He walked into the room with his back straight and his eyes blazing. "I know Lord Ashford is not my father," he said clearly. "My father died. And at first I hated Lord Ashford for it, because I thought he was trying to replace him. But he never did that. He never asked me to forget my father. He only offered to be someone I could trust and depend on. And he has been. He found me when I was lost. He saved my life. He teaches me things and listens when I talk and treats me like I matter. So yes, I know he is not my father, but he is the closest thing I have to one now, and I will not let you speak badly of him." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas stood his ground, fists clenched, chin raised, every inch his mother's son in that moment. Edmund looked at him with an expression I cannot adequately describe. Pride, love, gratitude, all mixed together in a way that made my eyes sting with tears. Lord Hartwell cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, the boy certainly has spirit. He has character," Edmund corrected. "He has integrity. Qualities I value far more than pedigree or propriety." He crossed to Thomas and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That was bravely done." Thomas looked up at him. They were being cruel. "To you and to Mama." "Yes. But we can bear it," Edmund assured him. "We know the truth of what we have built here. Their opinions cannot touch that." Lady Hartwell rose stiffly. "I believe we have overstayed our welcome. Come, Hartwell. It is clear we are not wanted here." "You are welcome to visit at any time," Edmund said, his voice carefully polite, "provided you can treat my wife and Thomas with respect. If you cannot manage that, then you are correct. You are not wanted." They left in a flurry of offended dignity, and when the door closed behind them, Edmund let out a long breath and sank into a chair. "That went even worse than I anticipated," he said. "I disagree." I sat down across from him. "We showed them that we are united, that they cannot divide us with their judgment and condescension. And Thomas," I looked at my son, "you were magnificent." Thomas shrugged, trying for nonchalance but unable to hide his pleased smile. "I could not let them speak to you like that." Edmund reached out and drew Thomas closer. "You called me the closest thing you have to a father," he said quietly. "Did you mean that?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, if that is all right. It is more than all right." Edmund's voice was rough with emotion. "It is everything, and if you wish, if you would be comfortable with it, I would like to formally adopt you as my son, legally, completely, so that you bear the Ashford name and have all the rights and protections that entails." Thomas's eyes went wide, Really, you would do that. I would be honored to do that, if your mother agrees, of course. Edmund looked at me. I could barely speak past the lump in my throat. Of course I agree. But Thomas, this must be your choice. No one will force you. Thomas looked between us. This child who had lost so much and gained so much more than he could have imagined. Can I think about it? He asked. Not because I do not want to, but because it feels important, like something I should be sure about. That is very wise, Edmund said. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless. That night after Thomas had gone to bed, Edmund and I sat together in his study. He had poured us both brandy, and we sipped in comfortable silence, processing the events of the day. I am sorry you had to endure my family's judgment, Edmund said finally. I am not. I meant what I said before. They needed to see that we are united, that they cannot undermine what we have built here. You were extraordinary today, both you and Thomas. He set down his glass and turned to face me fully. I need you to know something, Clara. When we married, I told myself this would be a practical arrangement, companionship without risk. But somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, I have fallen in love with you. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Edmund, I know we agreed to take things slowly. I know you may not feel the same, but I needed to tell you, because pretending otherwise feels like a lie, and we have built this marriage on honesty. I set my own glass down with shaking hands. I do feel the same. I did not expect to. I thought I would spend the rest of my life grateful but distant, respectful but never truly connected. But you have given me so much more than security, Edmund. You have given me partnership, trust, the feeling that I am valued not for what I can provide, but for who I am. And yes, somewhere in all of that, I have fallen in love with you too. He reached for me then, pulling me into his arms, and I went willingly, joyfully, feeling his heart beat against mine. We stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet study while the fire burned low and the house settled around us. When we finally pulled apart, Edmund's eyes were bright. Stay with me tonight, he said softly. Truly, as my wife in every sense. Yes, I whispered. Yes. He took my hand and led me through the connecting door I had never opened into rooms I had never entered. His bedroom was warmer than mine, more lived in, with books stacked on tables and a faint scent of tobacco and leather. He lit candles while I stood uncertain in the middle of the room, suddenly nervous despite wanting this, wanting him. Edmund came to me and cupped my face in his hands. We do not have to, he said gently. Not if you are not ready. I am ready. I covered his hands with mine. I want this. I want you. He kissed me then, slow and deep and full of promise, and I kissed him back with all the longing I had not allowed myself to feel. We came together gently, carefully, learning the landscape of each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and comfort. It was not the passionate, desperate coupling of young lovers. It was something better, I thought. The coming together of two people who had survived loss and found their way back to hope, who knew the value of tenderness and trust, who understood that love was not only feeling but choice, renewed each day with patience and grace. Afterward, we lay tangled together in his bed, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder. I never thought I would have this again, he said quietly. Love, connection, a family. Neither did I. And yet, here we are. Here we are, I agreed, and smiled against his skin. Spring had come to Ashford Manor, and with it, the possibility of new beginnings. We were not a perfect family. We carried scars and grief and memories of people we had lost. But we had each other now. 3 wounded souls who had found their way to wholeness through patience and courage, and the slow, persistent work of learning to trust again. It was enough. It was everything. It was the life I had not dared to hope for, built from the ashes of necessity and transformed by love into something beautiful and true. And as I lay in Edmund's arms, listening to his heartbeat slow into sleep, I knew with absolute certainty that I was home at last. Summer arrived in a rush of heat and color, transforming the grounds of Ashford Manor into something almost wild with beauty. Roses climbed the stone walls, their scent drifting through open windows. The gardens I had spent spring reviving burst into full bloom, beds of lavender and foxglove and sweet peas creating patches of purple and pink against the green. Thomas spent hours outdoors, his skin turning brown from the sun, his laughter echoing across the lawns as he played with the stable dogs or helped the gardeners or simply ran for the joy of running. The formal adoption had been completed in June, a quiet legal proceeding witnessed by our solicitor and blessed by Thomas's solemn signature on documents that made him Thomas Ashford in law as well as in our hearts. He had thought about it for 2 weeks before deciding, and when he finally said yes, Edmund had gathered him into an embrace that left both of them blinking back tears. The boy still spoke of his father, still kept a small portrait of him in his room, but he no longer carried his grief like a weapon. He had learned what Edmund and I were still learning, that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future, to love what was lost without rejecting what was found. Edmund and I had fallen into an easy intimacy that felt as natural as breathing. We took breakfast together every morning, sharing the newspaper and discussing our plans for the day. We walked the grounds in the evenings, his hand in mine, talking about everything and nothing. We shared a bed now, had become lovers in truth, and I marveled at the tenderness he showed me, the way he could make me feel cherished with nothing more than a look or a touch. This was not the distant arrangement I had agreed to in that cold November chapel. This was a marriage in every sense, built on friendship and respect, and a love that had grown slowly, but rooted deep. But life, as I had learned too well, does not allow happiness to remain unchallenged. In late July, a letter arrived from London that would test everything we had built. Edmund opened it at breakfast, his expression growing grave as he read. When he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at me. "What is wrong?" I asked, my heart already sinking. "It is from the War Office." He paused, choosing his words. "There is a matter that requires my attention in London. A diplomatic situation that has arisen with France. They have requested my assistance in the negotiations. You served in the diplomatic corps," Thomas said, "before you inherited the title. You told me about it." "Yes, and apparently my particular expertise is needed now." Edmund's voice was troubled. "They are asking me to come to London immediately. The negotiations are expected to last at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. 6 weeks. I tried to keep my voice steady. That is a long time. Too long. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I do not want to leave you, either of you. But this is a matter of some importance. If I refuse, it could damage relationships that are vital to England's interests." "Then you must go," I said, though the thought of his absence made my chest tighten with anxiety. "We will manage here until you return. Come with me, both of you." Edmund's words came quickly, urgently. "London in summer is unbearable, but we would be together. I have a house there, small but comfortable. We could make it work." Thomas and I looked at each other. I saw my own hesitation reflected in his face. We had only just found our footing here at Ashford Manor. The thought of uprooting ourselves again, even temporarily, felt dangerous somehow, as though we might lose what we had so carefully built. "I think," Thomas said slowly, "we should stay here. This is our home now. We should not leave it." Edmund looked disappointed, but not surprised. "You are certain?" Thomas nodded. "You will come back, and we will be here, waiting." The boy's confidence was absolute, as though Edmund's return was a fact already written in stone. I wished I could feel the same certainty, but I had learned too well that nothing in life was guaranteed. Edmund left 3 days later, taking a trunk and his valet and a carriage that would carry him the long miles to London. We stood in the drive to see him off, Thomas and I, and when Edmund embraced us both, I felt his reluctance to let go. 6 weeks, he promised, 2 months at the most, and I will write every day. We will be well, I assured him. Go and do what must be done. We will be here when you return. He kissed me once more, then climbed into the carriage. We watched until it disappeared around the bend in the drive, and then we turned back to the house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. The first week was not so difficult. Edmund's letters arrived daily as promised, long detailed accounts of the negotiations, of the frustrations of diplomacy, of how much he missed us. I wrote back with news of the estate, of Thomas's progress in his lessons, of the small, ordinary moments that made up our days. We established a rhythm, Thomas and I told myself that 6 weeks was nothing, that time would pass quickly, that soon Edmund would be home and everything would return to normal. But in the second week, the letters stopped coming. At first I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. The post was unreliable. Edmund had been called away from London unexpectedly. He had written, but the letters had been delayed or lost. I tried to maintain my composure, to keep Thomas from seeing my growing concern. But as days turned into a week with no word, fear began to claw at my chest. I wrote to the London house. No response came. I sent messages to mutual acquaintances. They had not seen Edmund in days. I contacted the War Office directly, requesting information about Lord Ashford's whereabouts, and received only a terse response that the matter was confidential and no details could be shared. Thomas noticed, of course. He had grown too perceptive for his own good, this boy who had learned to read the silences between words. "Something has happened to him," Thomas said one evening at dinner, his voice small and frightened. He would not stop writing unless something was wrong. "We do not know that," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "There could be many explanations, but you are worried. I can see it. I could not lie to him. Yes, I am worried. Are you going to go to London? To find him?" The question had been circling in my mind for days, but I had been afraid to voice it. To go to London meant leaving Thomas alone here, or dragging him into a city neither of us knew well, searching for a man who might be in danger or simply too occupied with urgent business to write. It felt reckless, but staying here doing nothing felt impossible. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I must. Then I am coming with you, Thomas." He is my father now. His voice was fierce. If something has happened to him, I need to be there. I need to help. I looked at this brave, stubborn boy who had become my son in every way that mattered, and I knew I could not refuse him. Very well. We will go together. We left the following morning, taking only what we could carry, and leaving Mrs. Halloway in charge of the household with instructions to send word immediately if Edmund returned. The journey to London took 2 days, and I spent every mile alternating between hope and dread, imagining scenarios both benign and terrible. The London house was in Mayfair, a narrow, elegant building on a quiet street. When we arrived, the knocker was off the door, a sign that the house was not officially in residence. My heart sank. I knocked anyway, and after a long wait, a nervous-looking housekeeper finally opened the door a crack. "Lady Ashford," she said, clearly surprised. "We did not expect you." "Where is my husband?" I demanded. "Why has he not written?" She hesitated, glancing behind her nervously. "He is here, my lady, but he is not well." The world tilted beneath me. "Not well? How? What has happened?" "Please come inside." She opened the door wider, and Thomas and I followed her into a house that felt closed up and airless despite the summer heat. She led us upstairs to a bedroom where the curtains were drawn and the air smelled of sickness and medicine. Edmund lay in the bed, pale and feverish, his eyes closed. A doctor sat beside him, checking his pulse with a grave expression. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The doctor looked up. "Who are you?" I am his wife. This is his son. Now tell me what is wrong. He contracted a fever 3 weeks ago." The doctor's voice was professional, but not unkind. He insisted on continuing with his work despite being unwell, and it worsened into pneumonia. He has been in and out of consciousness for the past 10 days. We have been treating him, but his condition has been precarious. I moved to the bedside, taking Edmund's hand in mine. It was hot and dry, his pulse fluttering weakly beneath my fingers. "Edmund," I said softly, "I am here. Thomas and I are here." His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding my face. "Clara." His voice was rough and barely audible. "You should not be here. Too dangerous. The fever. Hush." I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "We are staying. You cannot send us away." Thomas appeared on the other side of the bed, his face white but determined. "You have to get better," he said. "You promised you would come home." Edmund's gaze moved to Thomas, and something like a smile touched his lips. "Did I?" "Yes, and we are holding you to it." The doctor cleared his throat. "He needs rest and quiet. And you, my lady, should not expose yourself to this illness. Pneumonia is highly contagious. I am not leaving." I looked at him steadily. "Tell me what needs to be done, and I will do it." Over the following days, Thomas and I established ourselves in the London house and devoted ourselves entirely to Edmund's care. The doctor came twice daily. I sat with Edmund through the nights, sponging his forehead with cool water when the fever spiked, holding his hand when he thrashed through nightmares, reading to him in my low voice when he was calm enough to listen. Thomas helped where he could, fetching water and clean linens, running errands, refusing to be sent away even when the doctor insisted it was not safe for a child. Edmund's fever broke on the 5th day. I had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, exhausted beyond measure, and woke to find him watching me, his eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "You came," he said hoarsely. "Of course I came." I reached for his hand. "Did you think I would stay safely in the country while you lay here ill? I hoped you would have better sense. When have I ever had good sense?" I smiled through my tears. "I married you, did I not?" He laughed, a weak sound that turned into a cough. "I tried to send word, to tell you not to worry, but I could not seem to hold a pen steady enough to write. We received nothing. For 2 weeks, nothing. I was terrified. I am sorry." He squeezed my hand weakly. "I did not mean to frighten you." Thomas appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with tea. His face lit up when he saw Edmund awake. "You are better," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Getting there." Edmund's voice was stronger now. "Thanks to you both, I suspect." Thomas set down the tray and came to stand beside me. "We were not going to let you die. We only just got you properly trained as a father. It would be inconvenient to have to start over with someone new." Edmund laughed again, this time without coughing. "Very practical of you. I learned it from Mama." We sat together, the 3 of us, and I felt the fear that had gripped me for weeks finally begin to loosen. Edmund was alive. He was recovering. We had found him in time. Nothing else mattered. The doctor pronounced Edmund out of danger 3 days later, though he cautioned that full recovery would take time. We stayed in London another 2 weeks until Edmund was strong enough to travel, and then we made the slow journey back to Ashford Manor together, stopping frequently to rest, taking care not to overtax his strength. When the house finally came into view, Edmund let out a long breath. "Home," he said simply. Yes, I agreed. Home. Mrs. Halloway and the staff greeted us with relief and joy, exclaiming over Edmund's thinness and fussing over all of us. We settled back into the manor as though we had never left, though everything felt subtly different now, more precious somehow, more fragile. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Edmund and I sat together in our bedroom, the windows open to let in the cool evening air. I thought I was going to die. Edmund said quietly. "In London, when the fever was at its worst. I thought that was the end. And all I could think about was that I had waited so long to let myself love again, and now I was going to lose it all before I had barely begun to enjoy it. But you did not die." I took his hand. "You fought, and you lived, and you came back to us. Because you came for me. Because you refused to let me die alone in that house with only servants and doctors who did not know me." He turned to look at me, his eyes serious. "Clara, if this illness has taught me anything, it is that life is too short and too uncertain to leave important things unsaid. So I need to tell you now, while I have the chance. You are the greatest gift I have ever been given. You and Thomas both. You saved me from a life of cold isolation. You taught me how to feel again. You gave me a family when I thought that part of my life was over forever. I love you more than I have words to express, and I will spend whatever time I have left showing you that love in every way I can." Tears streamed down my face, but I was smiling. "Edmund Ashford, you are a romantic after all. Only with you." He pulled me into his arms. "Only ever with you." We held each other as the darkness deepened outside, as the house settled into its nighttime rhythms, as our breathing synchronized and our hearts beat in tandem. This was what I had not known to hope for when I married him in that cold November chapel. This depth of connection, this certainty of being loved and valued and chosen every single day. The summer passed into autumn, and Edmund's strength returned slowly but steadily. We resumed our walks around the grounds, though at a gentler pace. Thomas started formal lessons with a tutor Edmund hired from the village, a kind elderly man who recognized the boy's quick mind and challenged him appropriately. The three of us fell back into our routines, but with a new appreciation for their preciousness, a new awareness that nothing is promised and everything can be lost in an instant. In October, on the anniversary of our first meeting, Edmund planned a surprise. He had the ballroom opened and decorated, had the cook prepare an elaborate dinner, had musicians brought in from the village. When he led me into that grand space, candlelight gleaming off polished floors and Thomas waiting in his best clothes with a broad grin, I gasped. "What is this?" I asked. "A proper wedding celebration," Edmund said. "We never had one. And I wanted you to have at least one memory of our marriage that included beauty and joy and romance." The musicians began to play, and Edmund bowed formally. "May I have this dance, Lady Ashford?" I curtsied in return, laughing through my tears. "You may, Lord Ashford." He swept me into a waltz, and Thomas watched from the sidelines, clapping along with the music. We danced for hours that night, just the three of us in that enormous ballroom, creating memories to replace the cold, silent ceremony that had begun our marriage. And when Edmund kissed me at midnight beneath the crystal chandelier, with Thomas cheering in the background, I knew with absolute certainty that I had found my place in this world, this house, this man, this child, this life we had built from desperation and necessity and transformed through patience and courage into something beautiful. Winter came again, but this time I did not fear it. The house was warm, the fires were always lit, and most importantly, we had each other. Thomas grew taller and more confident, his nightmares about his father's death finally fading, replaced by dreams about his future. Edmund regained his health and his strength, throwing himself back into the management of his estates, but always making time for us, always prioritizing family above all else. And I became someone I had not known I could be. Not just a viscountess, not just a wife and mother, but a woman who had survived loss and found love again, who had taken a marriage of convenience and made it into something real and lasting and true. One evening in December, we sat together before the fire in the drawing room, Thomas reading in one corner, Edmund going over estate ledgers, and me working on embroidery for new curtains I was having made. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in every way except that it was ours. Edmund looked up from his work and caught me watching them both. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that a year ago I stood in a cold chapel and married a stranger to save my son and myself from ruin. I thought I was accepting a life of duty without love, safety without warmth. I thought I was making the best of a bad situation. And now?" His voice was soft. "Now I know that sometimes the best things in life come from the places we least expect them. That love can grow in the coldest soil if tended with patience and care. That family is not only blood, but choice, renewed every day through small acts of kindness and courage." I paused. "I am thinking that I am happy, Edmund. Truly, deeply happy. And I never thought I would be able to say that again." He set down his ledger and came to sit beside me, taking my hand in his. "I am happy too. Happier than I have any right to be. Happier than I ever dared to hope." Thomas looked up from his book. "Are you two being sentimental again?" Edmund laughed. "Yes. Is that a problem?" "No." Thomas grinned. "I am just glad you finally admit it instead of pretending to be all cold and proper." "I was never cold," Edmund protested. Thomas and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Edmund tried to maintain his dignity for a moment, then gave up and laughed with us. "Fine. I was occasionally slightly cool. But you have both thoroughly warmed me up." "Good," Thomas said, "because winter is long and we need you to keep the fires lit." We sat together in comfortable companionship as the snow began to fall outside, soft and silent, covering the grounds in white. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, all the grief and fear and uncertainty, all the small moments of connection that had built into something greater than their sum. I thought about the woman I had been, desperate and alone, and the woman I had become, loved and secure and whole. This was not the life I had imagined for myself. It was better. It was everything I had not known to want, given to me through the simple act of saying yes to a man who had needed me as much as I needed him, who had learned through me and through Thomas how to open his heart again, who had given us not just his name and his protection, but his love, freely and fully, without reservation. We were a family forged in winter and tested by separation and illness and doubt. We were three people who had lost everything and found each other. We were imperfect and scarred and learning still how to be what each other needed. But we were together, and that made us strong enough to face whatever came next. Spring would come again, summer would follow. The seasons would turn and turn again, and we would be here, in this house, living the life we had chosen, loving each other through good days and hard ones, building memories to sustain us through whatever trials the years might bring. Edmund had married me for convenience. Thomas had hated him for it. And together, slowly, painfully, beautifully, we had taught each other what love truly means. Not passion and grand gestures, though those had their place, but patience and presence, forgiveness and faith. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier. The courage to open your heart knowing it might break again. That was the lesson. That was the gift. That was the story I would carry with me for the rest of my days. I had been Clara Merrick, a widow with no prospects and a grieving child. I had become Clara Ashford, viscountess and wife and mother, but more than that, I had become simply Clara. A woman who knew her own worth, a woman who had survived and thrived and found joy on the other side of despair. And as I sat there between my husband and my son, watching the fire dance and listening to the wind whisper against the windows, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Home at last, loved at last, whole at last. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the happy ending I had not believed possible, written not in dramatic declarations but in quiet moments of connection, in hands held and promises kept, in a family built from ruins and made strong through the simple, persistent work of choosing love, day after ordinary day after ordinary day. The story that began with a cold transaction in a November chapel had become something neither Edmund nor I could have predicted. It had become real. It had become true. It had become ours. And we would hold it carefully, this precious, fragile, beautiful thing we had made together, and tend it with all the care and devotion it deserved for all the days of our lives.